We have a lot to do today. First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody to the 18th annual Rouge River Water Festival, and of course our first virtual one. This morning I have a special guest with me. I have Jim Nash, who is the Oakland County Water Resources Commissioner. Hello, Jim. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Well, thanks for having me.
So the Cranbrook Institute of Science has been hosting this Rouge River Water Festival since 2003. And in the very beginning, the Oakland County Water Resources Commissioner's Office has been our partner. They've been our community partner in helping us put on this awesome festival year after year. So tell me, Jim, why is it super important, do you think?
Well, we do it because we want your generation, you young kids who are now in school, you're going to be out of school, you're going to be grown up one day, and we want you to understand the impact that we have on the environment. Science is the most important thing we as humans do. It's what allows us to live in the world without having to fight the animals off. Before we had any kind of civilizations, we couldn't do much because we were constantly fighting for survival. Science allows us to have medicines, to have buildings. Engineering allows us to build roads, all the things that make us a society. And we want you to understand that as kids, when you grow up, you're going to be in this and you're going to be part of it. There's a lot of things that need to change. There's climate change. There's a lot of things happening that your generation is going to have to help clean up. So we need you to understand this stuff, and I want to do all I can to make that happen.
Well, thank you, Jim. Jim is also a big part of what we call Pure Oakland Water. And that is a nonprofit organization that gave us the funding to put this festival on. And we could not do what we've been doing all week or today or tomorrow and year after year without the support of Pure Oakland Water. So we'd like to thank you very much. I hope all of you will enjoy the program that we have for you today. I'm now going to introduce Liz, and Jim and I are going to jump off camera. We're going to let Liz take over. And don't forget, tune in tomorrow because we really have to learn to understand water protection and conservation. Jim, thank you so much for stopping by and saying hi today, and everybody have a good time.
Take care, folks.
All right, hi everybody. So today on day 3 here for the Rouge River Water Festival, we are going to learn about groundwater. We're going to talk about how we use groundwater, how groundwater moves, and a little bit about groundwater pollution as well. So first of all, what is groundwater, right? We need to know the term before we can talk about it. Groundwater is pretty much what it sounds like. It's the water we find underneath the Earth's surface. So when it rains and water falls to the earth, it can end up in a variety of different places. If you think back to Tuesday, if you were with us, we talked about our water cycle and all the different locations we can find water in. So some of the rain that falls is going to fall directly into our lakes and our rivers and our streams. Some of that water is going to move across the surface of the ground, like we talked about yesterday, and make its way to a body of water. And some of that water is going to be absorbed by the ground. This process is called infiltration, and it's how water gets into our groundwater system from the other parts of our water cycle. If you were with us on Monday, I utilized this poll feature a little bit to get us all participating. I'm going to do the same thing today, so I'm going to ask you some questions and see if you can answer them. So I am going to open up our first poll to ask you the first question in just a second here. That question is just, who uses groundwater? Why do we care about it? Who uses it? So I'm going to launch that first poll. You guys should see that pop up. And I'm going to give you, 30 seconds, 45 seconds to answer this one. So who do we think uses our groundwater resources? See how many people we can get participating here. give you about 10 more seconds to answer this question. Getting some good numbers coming in here. So I'm going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I'm going to end that. Okay. And we can see here that about 47% of you said everybody uses groundwater. But when we have about a quarter of all of our viewers saying that it's just people with wells or that it's just farmers, which is a pretty common misconception. I'm going to get rid of this poll. It's actually everybody. In fact, 45% of people living in Michigan get the water in their household from underground, from our groundwater resources. That's about 700 million gallons of water a day that we are using in our homes from groundwater. We also use about 100 million gallons of groundwater a day for irrigation and for farming. So it is a really important resource for our farmers. And there are about 1.25 million household wells in Michigan alone. So yes, farmers use groundwater. Yes, people with wells use groundwater, but so do people living in cities, so do people living in the suburbs. We're all in some way reliant on our groundwater resources in order to get our water. So my second question for you, as we kind of start talking a little bit more about what groundwater is and where we find it, is does groundwater move? If groundwater is stored underneath the surface, is it moving like the rest of the water in our water cycle? So I'm going to open up question 2 in our poll here and go ahead and launch that. So that's going to ask you if groundwater moves. So same deal. I'll give you about 45 seconds to answer that. Answers coming in. Again, give you about 20 more seconds to see how many people we can get participating. I'm going to close this one.
Those numbers too. Oh, you can't see them.
All right, I'm going to close this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And it looks like a majority of you say that groundwater does move. So that is absolutely correct, right? Just because water is beneath the surface doesn't mean it's not moving. Just like all the water on our earth, water is constantly moving from place to place. It's always moving downhill, like we talked about yesterday, even if it's underground. But groundwater is not like an underground river moving underneath the surface of the earth. It's moving through the cracks in the spaces between the materials we find underground. The speed at which our groundwater is moving really depends on that material that our groundwater is moving through. So right here, I have a setup of 3 common materials we find underneath the surface of the earth. I have some sand, I have some gravel, and I have some clay. Okay? I want to know, I'm going to open up another question for you. Which of these materials do you think our water will move through the fastest? So I'm going to ask you to answer that question, and then we're going to do a little demonstration and find out the answer. Okay? So question 3 should be open up for you. Which material do you think water will move through the fastest? Our sand, our gravel, or our clay? I'll give you a little bit longer on this one. It's kind of a harder question. I want you to really think about it. Same answers. Sorry. All right, I'm going to close this one in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, so a lot of you put sand, quite a few of you put gravel, and we have just a couple people put clay. So I'm gonna get rid of this full screen and we are going to find out. So this is when, can I have a guest horror? I don't have 3 hands, so we wanna get this all going at the same time, so I need a little bit of help. All right, so I'm gonna count down from 3, and we're going to pour the water into our cups at the same time and see what happens. So in 3, 2, 1. All right. So what we can see happening here, that water side blue to make it a little bit easier for you guys to see. That water is moving through our gravel really, really quickly. Our clay has some dripping. Our sand has some drips. It's getting there. But we can see that gravel is the material that our water is going to move through the fastest. Then it's going to be sand, even though water is moving through my clay pretty quick here. That usually doesn't happen. It's our sand that water is going to move through the second fastest. And then clay water actually moves through pretty slowly. But I think that what happened is my clay had some water in it already when we started. It was a little wet, so it's moving a little bit more quickly than we're used to seeing it go. So the reason for this difference in speed of water through these materials is the individual spaces between all the different pieces of that material. So if we think about gravel, our pieces of gravel are pretty large. So the space between those pieces of gravel is going to be pretty large as well. So water is going to move through that gravel pretty quickly, as we saw. We can see that our sand is picking up pace a little bit. Sand is smaller. The spaces in between that sand are smaller, but there's still enough room for water to move between those individual particles. Something kind of unique about sand is that it's actually working as a filter as well as the water is moving through. So it's cleaning up our water as we go. Clay has really, really tiny individual particles. So the space between those is going to be very, very small, and it's going to take usually quite a long time for our water to get through our particles of clay. So clay water doesn't move through very quickly at all. So why do we want to know about this, right? Why do we care what materials water is moving through, how it moves, and how much water can move through those materials? Well, I'm going to ask you a question where this would come in handy, this knowledge. If you were going to dig a well, say in your backyard, what material would you want to dig into? Which of these 3 materials do you think would be the best for that well? So I'm going to open that question up. We have a lot of options here. So you could say sand, you could say gravel, you could say clay, materials that we see here, or we could say a combination of those 2. So I want to see what you think. Which materials are going to be better for us to have a well? Think about what we want a well to do, right? Provide drinking water. So we're going to want to have water in our well, and we're going to want that to be usable water. I'll give you a little bit more time to get those answers coming in. Okay. A lot more evenly split on this one. All right. So I'm going to give you 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And this poll. All right. This one was a lot more split. We had a lot of choices here, a lot of different thoughts. But the correct answer is actually going to be a combination of our sand and gravel. Because not only do we want our well to fill up quickly, so we want there to be dug into gravel so that water is able to get in. Oops, I should close this. to get into that well. But having some sand in that mix will help clean our water because that sand acts as a filter. So some combination of sand and gravel is going to be great to dig into an area that will fill up with water. What about if we were going to build a landfill? I want to know what material you think you would want to line the bottom of that landfill. So I'm going to open that question up and give you about 40 seconds. What material would we want as the bottom layer of our landfill? Lots of different thoughts here. All right, in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. See our results. Looks like we had a lot of people thinking clay, which is correct. Clay is because water moves through clay at the slowest rate. That means that any of the dirty water that we would collect at a landfill as it's moving through household waste, food waste, all sorts of chemicals, will be prevented from entering our groundwater for the longest amount of time if we have that clay layer. So all of these materials are found underground in different layers, and groundwater is moving through all of these layers at different rates. Any of these material layers that stores and transmits water of a usable quality is what we call an aquifer. And it's kind of a complicated definition, sounds kind of like a complicated definition, but it's really not. So for example, when we said that we would dig a well down into sand and gravel, we would be digging a well into a sand and gravel aquifer because we know that there's usable groundwater stored there. The spaces between the particles are big enough for us to withdraw water. So all materials aren't going to be aquifers. If I stick a straw into my cup of gravel here, the straw we can say represents a well. So I stick it down in here, put my finger on the top. I'm going to draw up water. That's all that's in it. There's no gravel particles in here, just water. If I do the same thing into my clay, I'm not getting just water out of my clay. I'm getting a lot of clay in my straw, or in this case, in my well. So clay is not considered an aquifer because I don't get usable groundwater out of that clay. Whereas gravel, I'm just pulling off water. So we're gonna build an aquifer so we can see this more clearly. So I have a bucket here. I'm gonna pour a layer of sand in my bucket. This is our sand aquifer, our sand layer. Okay. And I'm going to pour some water into my aquifer as well. I just want enough water in here to get my sand wet. I don't really want any standing water because this is underground. So we're just saturating that clay, that sand, getting it a little wet like it would be if it were an underground aquifer. Okay, so I am then going to take some clay. This is my clay layer, and I'm going to set that in my kind of underground area here as well. So my clay layer's in there. Okay. If I pour water onto this clay layer, it's not going to soak into our clay. So we have, kind of hard to see because the clay is built up along the sides so that it sticks. But we have a standing layer of water over our clay. the water is not moving through the clay and into the sand beneath it. Just like we said would happen if we had it lining our landfill, right? It's stopping the water from getting to that next layer. I'm going to add some gravel to my aquifer now. So our next layer is going to be a layer of gravel. We're going to have this so that we have kind of a gravel hill on one side and a lower area of our gravel on the other side. So when I add water now into our aquifer here, I'm just going to pour it till it gets just to about the top of our gravel, filling up the spaces in our gravel. So we can see there's water in between the gravel on this side, where we have that hill, and on the other side, we have our surface water. So this would be what we would consider the lake area over on this half here. So we have surface water, we have land, and then we have our layers of our aquifer, which we can kind of see. We can definitely see the clay. That's pretty clear there. So my final question for you is, do you think that pollution on the land affects the quality of the water within the quality of our groundwater, the water within our aquifers? So I'm going to open that last question up. Does pollution on land affect our groundwater?
I don't have that question. I don't have that question. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to give you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And that one, the majority of you got this correct. Yes, pollution on the surface of our planet does affect our groundwater, and we're going to demonstrate that real quick right now. So I have some dye here. I'm going to add a few drops of this up on the surface of our planet here, our little model. This is going to represent pollution on our planet. So something like chemical fertilizer, it could be oil leaking from a car. And when I add these drops on the surface, if we watch, it's going to rain. And we'll be able to see this blue pollution move throughout our aquifer and even down into our layer of sand. So we can see, right? See that blue? How quickly it traveled through that gravel layer. It's traveling into our sand layer. But that clay it's getting around the clay a little bit, but the clay is stopping, mostly because I'm moving it. The clay is stopping some of that pollution from moving as quickly into our sand aquifer, but we can see it's starting to fill up. So what I want you to think about for tomorrow, and we're going to talk about ways that we can protect our freshwater resources. I want you to think about what are some of the activities around your home, maybe or around your school, you think could cause groundwater pollution. And then I want you to think about some of the things we can do to stop that pollution from happening. And tomorrow, when we discuss how we use our freshwater resources and how we can protect and conserve them, we'll talk a little bit more about how to protect all of our freshwater and see what we can do. So thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you the rest of the week tomorrow.
You got one question.
Okay, I have a question. Oh, I do. You're right. Sorry. I did have one groundwater related question submitted, and that was, are there fish in aquifers? And I think that through this process talking about them, if an aquifer is a place where water is moving between particles of things like sand or gravel, we're not going to have any fish being able to live in there. Fish are they're much too big to get underground and into our aquifers. They're staying in our surface water, so there's no fish in aquifers. All right. So thank you guys.